The rain poured relentlessly over the streets of Baltimore, turning the cracked pavement into a slick, treacherous mess. The dim streetlights flickered uncertainly, casting long shadows against the worn-down buildings. It was nearly midnight, and most businesses had closed for the night, except for Maggie's Diner, a cozy little spot on the corner of Lexington Avenue. Inside, Elena Carter wiped down the counter, exhausted but unwilling to let fatigue dull her kindness. She had worked a grueling 12-hour shift, her back aching and feet sore from standing all day. But she had never been the type to turn someone away, not when they needed help. That was how her grandmother had raised her. Kindness doesn't cost a thing, baby girl, but it can be the richest gift you give. Just as she reached for the closed sign, movement outside caught her eye. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw a small figure huddled near the diner's neon sign. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, sat in a battered wheelchair, shivering beneath a tattered coat. His dark hair clung to his forehead, soaked through, and he clutched a frayed blanket that did little to protect him from the cold. Elena's heart clenched. No child should be out in this weather, let alone alone in a wheelchair. Without hesitation, she pushed open the door, shivering as the cold air bit at her damp skin. "Hey, sweetheart," she called gently, crouching beside him. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The boy flinched slightly, then looked up at her with wide, uncertain blue eyes. He hesitated before answering, his voice barely louder than the rain. "I'm waiting for my dad." Elena glanced up and down the street, but all she saw were empty sidewalks and the dim glow of a pawnshop's neon cash for gold sign across the road. A few cars hissed past on the wet asphalt, their headlights briefly illuminating the lonely scene. "Where is he, sweetheart?" she pressed, concern creeping into her voice. The boy shrugged, pulling his blanket tighter. Elena exhaled, biting her lip. She had seen too many kids left waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Maybe his father was just running late, but maybe he wasn't coming at all. "Well, you can't stay out here, not in this mess," she said, offering a warm smile. "Come inside with me, okay? It's warm, and I've got something special for you." The boy hesitated, his fingers tightening around the blanket. But after a few moments, he gave a small nod. Gently, Elena took hold of the wheelchair's handles and rolled him inside. The warmth of the diner embraced them instantly, the scent of buttered toast and fresh coffee wrapping around them like a soft blanket. She led him to a booth near the radiator, draping a dry towel over his shoulders before crouching to meet his gaze. "I'm Elena," she said, flashing another grin. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy sniffled, then murmured, "Leo." Elena nodded approvingly. "That's a strong name. You hungry?" Leo hesitated before nodding shyly. Elena didn't wait for him to say more. She was already moving toward the kitchen, slicing a fresh loaf of sourdough and preparing her go-to-comfort meal, golden, crispy grilled cheese with a bowl of hot tomato soup on the side. What she didn't know was that across the street, hidden in the shadows of a sleek black Bentley, a man was watching. Sebastian Hayes sat in silence, his sharp gray eyes locked onto the scene inside the diner. The billionaire had built his empire on control, precision, and power. Yet here he was, watching his son share laughter with a stranger, something Sebastian hadn't seen in years. And though Elena didn't know it yet, her simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. The next morning, Elena Carter woke up with a dull ache in her legs, a familiar reminder of another long shift at Maggie's Diner. She stretched, yawning as the early autumn sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of her tiny apartment. Rent was due in a few days, and despite working double shifts all week, she still wasn't sure if she'd have enough to cover it. She pushed the thought aside as she poured herself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, the way her grandmother used to drink it. As she took her first sip, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Frowning, Elena set her mug down and patted across the worn-out floorboards. No one ever knocked this early, and certainly not in this neighborhood. Peering through the peephole, she froze. Standing outside was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in an expensive black coat that looked like it cost more than her entire monthly rent. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and piercing gray eyes that studied the door with unnerving patience. Her instincts screamed at her to ignore it, but curiosity won out. Slowly, she unlatched the door and opened it just enough to see his face clearly. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice firm. The man's gaze didn't waver. "Elena Carter?" She nodded cautiously. "My name is Sebastian Hayes," he said. "I believe you met my son last night." The pieces clicked together instantly. Leo. The little boy with the shy smile, the one she had pulled in from the rain and fed grilled cheese and soup. Elena's stomach tightened. She had a bad feeling about this. "Look," she said, crossing her arms, "if you're here to yell at me for feeding your kid, you can turn right around. I didn't do anything wrong." Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I'm not here to reprimand you," he said. "I'm here to make you an offer." Elena blinked. "An offer?" Without another word, Sebastian stepped inside, pulling a thick envelope from his coat and placing it on her wobbly kitchen table. The weight of it made the wood creak. Elena eyed it warily. "What is that?" "A job." She let out a sharp laugh. "A job? Doing what?" "Making coffee for rich people?" For the first time, something close to amusement flickered across his face. "No. You'd be working directly with me. Handling negotiations, managing public relations, using that sharp intuition you seem to have." Elena shook her head, still trying to process. "Why me? You don't even know me." Sebastian met her gaze. "I know enough." His voice was steady, unshakable. "I know you took care of my son when you had nothing to gain. I know you didn't treat him like an inconvenience. And I know that's rare." Her throat tightened. She looked at the envelope again, then back at him. "And if I say no?" she asked. Sebastian shrugged. "Then you say no." Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Finally, Elena exhaled, her fingers brushing over the envelope. "I'll think about it." Sebastian studied her for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Good." And without another word, he turned and left. Elena stood there long after the door shut, the weight of the envelope in her hands feeling heavier than it should. Because deep down, she already knew she wasn't just thinking about it. She was going to say yes. Elena Carter had never set foot in a place like Hayes Technologies before. The towering glass building stood like a monument to wealth and power, its steel and marble interior gleaming under the bright overhead lights. The scent of fresh brewed espresso and polished wood filled the air as she stepped inside, clutching the strap of her thrifted leather purse a little tighter. She had dressed as professionally as she could, navy slacks and a second-hand blazer she had ironed 3 times that morning. Even so, she felt the weight of every glance thrown her way. It wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. The moment she approached the sleek reception desk, a young woman with perfect blonde curls and a sharp smile looked up. "Can I help you?" "I have a meeting with Mr. Hayes," Elena said, keeping her voice steady. The woman's smile didn't falter, but her gaze flickered over Elena's clothes, just for a second. "And you are?" Elena Carter. The receptionist hesitated, then typed something into her computer. A moment later, she nodded. "He's expecting you. Take the elevator to the top floor." Elena exhaled and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the executive suite. As the doors slid shut, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. This was a far cry from Maggie's diner. Here, people walked with purpose, spoke in crisp, clipped tones. Everything screamed money, efficiency, power. She had a feeling this world would chew her up if she let it. The doors opened to a sprawling office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Sebastian Hayes stood near his desk, reviewing something on a tablet. He didn't look up as she entered. "You're late." Elena arched a brow. "By 2 minutes." Sebastian finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "That's 2 minutes I don't get back." Elena sighed, shaking her head. "Look, do you want me here or not?" He leaned back, studying her. "That remains to be seen." Before she could fire back, the glass doors opened again, and a tall, impeccably dressed woman entered, tablet in hand. Her presence commanded attention, poised, controlled, and sharp-eyed. "Victoria Lane," the woman said smoothly, her tone betraying nothing. "Welcome to Hayes Technologies, Ms. Carter." Elena met her gaze head-on. "Oh, we're doing last names? Good to see you, Ms. Lane." Something flickered in Victoria's expression, amusement? Annoyance? It was gone before Elena could place it. "I've prepared the company protocols for review," Victoria continued, handing Sebastian the tablet. "Would you like me to brief her?" Sebastian didn't even glance up. "No. I will." Victoria hesitated just a fraction of a second, then nodded. But as she turned to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at Elena. "Good luck," she murmured. Elena tilted her head. The way she said it didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded like a warning. She didn't have much time to dwell on it before Sebastian spoke again. "You're here because I believe you can read people," he said. "That's a skill money can't buy. Let's see if you can prove me right." Elena folded her arms. "Guess we'll find out." She had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: this world wasn't going to make room for her. She was going to have to take it. Elena Carter had been at Hayes Technologies for only 3 weeks, but every day felt like a battlefield. She had spent her entire career working in diners, juggling double shifts and stretching every dollar. Now, she found herself in high-stakes meetings with corporate giants, expected to hold her own among people who had spent their lives in boardrooms. And today, she would face her biggest challenge yet. The Orion Group, one of the company's largest partners, had proposed moving a major part of their production overseas. On paper, it was a smart financial move: cheaper labor, reduced costs. But Elena saw what others didn't: the human cost. Thousands of American workers would lose their jobs, entire families uprooted for the sake of a few extra percentage points in profit margins. Sebastian Hayes sat at the head of the long mahogany conference table, unreadable as always. On the other side, Philip Langford, the CEO of Orion, leaned back in his chair, his slicked-back white hair giving him the air of an old-money tycoon who had never been told no in his life. "Mr. Hayes," Langford began, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "This isn't personal. It's just business. We both know that reducing costs increases profits. Our shareholders demand it." Elena clenched her jaw. She had heard those words before: "It's just business." That was what her mother's employer had said when they shut down the textile factory she had worked at for 20 years. It wasn't personal when they walked into a room full of employees, handed them severance checks that barely covered 2 months' rent, and turned off the lights for good. Sebastian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Elena. "Miss Carter, what's your take?" The room fell silent. This was it, the moment where she either proved she belonged or walked out of here as nothing more than a glorified assistant. Elena inhaled slowly, keeping her voice steady. "I understand the numbers," she said. "On paper, moving overseas looks good. But let's talk about what happens next. 3 years from now, labor costs rise. Local governments increase tariffs to protect their economies. You've already cut ties with your domestic workforce, so bringing production back will be expensive, millions in restructuring and rehiring." Langford's thin smile faltered slightly. Elena pressed on. "Then there's the PR nightmare. Headlines like Orion Group abandons American workers for foreign profits. How do you think that'll sit with consumers? Or your investors, when they see stock prices dip? You might save money now, but you'll pay for it later. And when you do, it won't be just business anymore." Silence stretched across the room. Langford glanced at his executives, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "We'll revisit the proposal." Sebastian's expression didn't change, but Elena could feel the shift in the room. She had just changed the game. As the Orion Group executives filed out, Sebastian finally looked at her. "I knew I hired you for a reason." Elena smirked. "Damn right you did." Elena Carter had barely settled into her new role at Hayes Technologies when the ground beneath her began to shift. For weeks, she had been proving herself, winning negotiations, outmaneuvering seasoned executives, and earning a grudging respect from those who had initially dismissed her. But in a world where power was everything, success always made enemies. It started with whispers. People in the office had begun speaking in hushed tones when she passed by. Conversations abruptly stopped when she entered a room. Emails she was supposed to receive never arrived, and meetings were scheduled without her knowledge. Then, the real blow came. One afternoon, as she returned from a client meeting, Victoria Lane intercepted her in the hallway, her usual composed expression replaced with something sharp and urgent. "We have a problem." Elena frowned. "Define problem." Victoria handed her a printed email. The moment Elena's eyes skimmed the contents, her stomach twisted into a knot. It was a company report, classified financial data, and it had been leaked to the press. Worse, the forwarded email had her name on it. Elena's blood ran cold. "This isn't mine," she said immediately. "I know," Victoria replied. "But someone wants it to be." Panic clawed at her throat. She had been in enough situations to know how quickly things could spiral. A black woman in a room full of powerful executives didn't get the benefit of the doubt. She didn't get to be innocent until proven guilty. She was guilty the moment someone pointed a finger. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Who else has seen this?" Victoria hesitated. "Sebastian." "And the board." Elena swore under her breath. Sebastian Hayes was not a man known for patience. He ran his company with ruthless efficiency, and if he thought she had compromised his empire, she wouldn't get so much as a second chance. Minutes later, she found herself in his office. The air felt different, colder. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, his gray eyes locked onto her with an unreadable intensity. "Tell me I wasn't wrong about you," he said quietly. Elena slammed the email onto his desk. "You weren't. But someone wants you to think you were." Sebastian didn't blink. "The board wants a full investigation." Until we get answers, you're the prime suspect." Elena clenched her jaw. "And what do you think?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, he spoke. "I think someone inside this company is trying to get rid of you. The question is, why?" For the first time since she stepped into this world, Elena realized she wasn't just fighting for her job. She was fighting to survive. Elena Carter had spent years learning how to survive in a world that wasn't built for her. But this, being framed for corporate espionage, was a whole different game. She had only one choice: fight back. That night, long after most of Hayes Technologies had emptied out, she sat in a dimly lit conference room with Victoria Lane and a cybersecurity specialist named Ethan Clark, one of the few people in the company who didn't seem eager to see her gone. Ethan was a quiet, unassuming guy in his early 30s, the kind who could blend into any room and overhear every conversation without being noticed. "Whoever did this covered their tracks well," Ethan said, typing furiously on his laptop. "The email forwarding the financial data was sent from your account, but it was routed through an external server first. Someone spoofed your credentials." Elena folded her arms. "Can you trace it?" Ethan let out a low whistle. "They were careful, but not careful enough. I'm cross-referencing the IP history with recent network logins." Minutes passed in tense silence, the only sound the rhythmic tapping of Ethan's fingers on the keyboard. Then, suddenly, he stiffened. "Got something." Victoria leaned in. "Who?" Ethan turned the laptop toward them, revealing an email log. The name at the top made Victoria's eyes narrow and Elena's stomach twist. Richard Calloway. A senior executive with a spotless record, Calloway had been with Hayes Technologies for a decade. He was the kind of man who smiled in board meetings and played golf with investors, a man who had always managed to keep his hands clean. Until now. Elena exhaled. "Why would he go after me?" Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because you're a threat." She gestured toward the open file on Ethan's screen. "Calloway's been slowly bleeding money from the company, small amounts, shuffled between accounts, just enough to stay under the radar. But your work on the Orion deal? It forced a deeper audit. If anyone kept digging, they'd find his little side business. He needed a scapegoat to throw the board off his trail." Elena's hands curled into fists. She wasn't just being framed, she was being sacrificed. "How do we take him down?" she asked. Victoria smirked. "Oh, I have a plan." The next morning, Elena strode into the boardroom before they could summon her. Around the table, powerful men in tailored suits looked up, expecting her to fold. She didn't. Instead, she dropped a thick folder onto the table. "Before you fire me," she said, "you might want to read this." As they flipped through the pages, bank transfers, email logs, call records, the room shifted. Faces paled. Murmurs spread. At the far end, Richard Calloway stiffened. Sebastian Hayes leaned back, unreadable as always. Then, finally, he spoke. "Effective immediately, Calloway is terminated. Full legal action will follow." Elena exhaled as security escorted Calloway out. She had just won. And whoever thought they could bury her, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The fallout from Richard Calloway's betrayal rippled through Hayes Technologies like a shockwave. The board had been quick to distance themselves from the scandal, releasing statements about corporate integrity and compliance. But Elena Carter knew the truth. If she hadn't fought back, she would have been the one taking the fall. Instead, she had won. 2 weeks later, she stood in Sebastian Hayes' office, staring out at the sprawling city skyline. The air between them was different now, not quite friendly, but no longer as tense. There was something new in his expression when he looked at her: respect. "You handled yourself well," he said, leaning back in his chair. Elena smirked. "You sound surprised." Sebastian tilted his head slightly, as if considering his words. "I knew you were sharp. I didn't realize how well you understood the game." She turned to face him fully. "It's not a game when your whole life is on the line." He nodded, almost approvingly. Then, without ceremony, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a new contract, one with her name on it. "I'm promoting you," he said simply. Elena blinked, caught off guard. "To what?" "Director of Strategic Development." She inhaled sharply. That was 3 levels above where she was now. It meant a seat at the table, a voice in company decisions. It meant real power, not just symbolic, but the kind that could make an impact. "You earned it," Sebastian added, watching her carefully. She let out a slow breath. She had. The news spread quickly. Some congratulated her, others murmured behind closed doors, and a few made it clear they thought she didn't deserve it. Elena didn't care. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. She had spent years scraping by, wondering if she'd make rent, dealing with bosses who saw her as disposable. But now, she was the one making the decisions. And she knew exactly what she wanted to change. One of her first moves as director was pushing for better labor policies, initiatives that protected workers, both domestic and international. She worked to restructure mentorship programs, ensuring talented employees from underrepresented backgrounds had the opportunities they deserved. At first, the board resisted. But Sebastian backed her, and soon, the changes became reality. Months later, she stood in a crowded conference hall, watching as employees gathered for the company's first ever Diversity and Inclusion Summit. It wasn't just a corporate checkbox event, it was real, meaningful change. At her side, Victoria Lane glanced over. "I have to admit," Victoria murmured, "I didn't think you'd last this long." Elena chuckled. "Neither did half the people in this building." Victoria smirked. "But here you are." Elena looked around, taking it all in. Yes, here she was. And she wasn't going anywhere. Years had passed since Elena Carter first stepped into Hayes Technologies as an outsider. Now, she sat in a corner office with a breathtaking view of Baltimore's skyline. The nameplate on her door read Vice President of Corporate Strategy, a title that once felt like an impossible dream. But her true success wasn't measured in promotions or paychecks. It was in the lives she changed. Under her leadership, the company had transformed. Hayes Technologies no longer just measured profits, it measured impact. New policies ensured fair wages, ethical production, and mentorship programs for employees from diverse backgrounds. And then there was the Carter Hayes Foundation, her proudest achievement. She had spent years fighting to prove she belonged in a world that was never built for her. Now, she was building something of her own, a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships, job training, and community support for underprivileged youth. Today, standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their newest community center, Elena felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. A crowd had gathered, their faces filled with anticipation. Among them, she spotted Sebastian Hayes, standing off to the side, hands in his pockets. His presence still carried an air of quiet authority, but there was something different about him now, less distant, more human. Beside him, a familiar figure rolled up in a sleek, custom wheelchair. Leo Hayes, now a college freshman, grinned as he held the ceremonial scissors in his hands. "Ready, kid?" Elena asked, nudging him lightly. Leo puffed out his chest. "Born ready." With a single snip, the ribbon fell, and applause erupted around them. Leo turned to her, his blue eyes shining. "You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't given me that grilled cheese sandwich." Elena laughed, shaking her head. "That's the best investment I ever made." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "You changed a lot of lives, Carter." Elena met his gaze. "So did you." For the first time, he smiled. As the celebration continued, Elena stepped back for a moment, watching the laughter, the hope, the future she had helped shape. She had once believed success was about surviving. Now, she knew it was about lifting others up so they could thrive. And that, not the job, not the title, not the money, would be her legacy. Life often takes us down unexpected paths, and sometimes, a single act of kindness can change everything. Elena Carter never set out to climb the corporate ladder or transform an industry. She simply saw a child in need and chose to help. That one moment of compassion altered not just her life, but the lives of countless others. This story reminds us that character matters more than circumstances. Many of us grew up believing in hard work, integrity, and doing what's right, even when no one is watching. Elena's journey proves that these values still hold power, even in a world that often prioritizes wealth and status over decency. Her resilience is another lesson we can all take to heart. Challenges, whether in careers, relationships, or personal growth, are inevitable. But how we respond to adversity defines us. Elena didn't just survive, she fought back, adapted, and proved her worth in an environment designed to dismiss her. No matter our age, it's never too late to stand up for ourselves and what we believe in. And finally, true success isn't about what we accumulate, it's about what we leave behind. Elena's greatest achievement wasn't her position or wealth, but the lives she impacted. The community she built. The opportunities she created for those who came after her. As we reflect on our own journeys, we should ask ourselves, what kind of legacy are we leaving? Because in the end, the most meaningful measure of success is not how high we climb, but how many people we lift along the way.